Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, How SAP Customers Are Accelerating SAP HANA Adoption at Lower Costs with VMware, hosted by SAP Insider and presented by VMware. My name is Steve Paul. I'm your host today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and our speakers. Later in the program, we'll ask for your feedback. You can participate in our Q&A session by asking questions about the information presented in this webinar at any time. Just type your questions into the Q&A text box located below the speaker bios on the left, and then click the Submit button. We'll answer as many questions as time permits after the Q&A session. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you can download a PDF copy of this presentation by clicking in the resource box on the bottom left of our console. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. And if you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the Help question mark icon on the bottom right of your console. If slides are not advancing, please press the F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your browser. And now on to our presentation, How SAP Customers Are Accelerating SAP HANA Adoption at Lower Costs with VMware. Leading today's discussion will be Bob Goldsand, Global Alliance Partner Architect with VMware, Inc. Over to you, Bob. Hello,
Thanks,
Bob.
Steve. Yeah, thanks again, Steve. And I'm really pleased to be moderating this webinar with our customers. This is sort of a command performance. We had a very similar session at VMworld. It's one thing to hear myself or my colleagues from VMware talk about virtualizing HANA. It's completely different perspective when you hear it from our customers, and it adds credence to what we've been talking about through the last 2 years. So without further ado, I'm going to start off by having each of our panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start off with Brett. So, Brett, could you give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, hi. My name is Brett Greenstein. I'm the Principal Systems Engineer with ServiceNow. And so we were asked to participate in this because of our process of going through the migration of a physical installation to a virtualization implementation. All of our HANA databases are stored or hosted in our own data center. All right, we host it ourselves. And the reason we chose to use HANA in the first place was performance is a big topic for our users. All right, and slow response leads to them productivity. So it was the choice and the decision from our finance team to run the BPC application on HANA for performance.
Great. All right, well, Dustin, can you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Dustin Berlekamp with Marathon Petroleum Company in Findlay, Ohio. I'm the VMware and Wintel infrastructure architect, so I'm responsible for the physical servers, the virtualization layer, and the guest operating system.
Thanks, Dustin. Dan?
Sure, I'm Dan Allensworth. I'm Director for Technical Services at Johnsonville. That includes network storage servers, service desk, all of those areas. HANA falls under that.
Okay. Len?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, Len Landale, VP of ERP and Application Hosting for Secure24. We're a managed service provider and hosting company. I'm responsible for our SAP hosting practice as well as our other application practice, and have worked really closely with our CTOs and application architects on our HANA deployment.
Great. And last but not least, Michael?
Sure. Michael Harding. I'm the director in the SAP architecture space within EMCIT. We've actually relatively new SAP customer. We've been running it for almost 3.5 years now, and HANA has been a piece of our equation, if you will, for roughly 3 of those 3.5 years, and continues to be as we move forward. So.
Great. Thanks, guys. And we'll pick this up with, actually Brett started us off a little bit, so we'll pick it up with Brett. But before we get into, virtualizing HANA, we want to understand why each of your organizations actually chose HANA. Was it strategic? Were there technical reasons? Is it meeting your expectations? So Brett, could you kind of pick up from where you left off and talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was kind of jumping the gun there a little earlier, but yeah. So our data center, our corporate data center, is mostly virtualized. Like just everything is on VMware except for it was just HANA for a while. It was the only physical install that we had, and it was because back when we installed HANA in 2013. SAP didn't support it on VMware. So what we had to do is architect kind of different ways of managing and maintaining this one-off piece of infrastructure, right, to support DR and backup strategies. So it was our goal for a long time to figure out a way to virtualize it. So for the longest time, we had been running this HANA in a sub-production environment, and it was working fine. And we were finally we realized that we come to learn that SAP and VMware had been working on the strategy to be able to support it on VMware. So it was once we figured that out, we engaged Bob Goldsand to do a POC. And it was surprisingly very simple, right? We spent a couple hours together going through the POC, and it was very simple. We learned that anyone that has some basic Linux administration skills could set this up, and we ended up defining a template so that we could rapidly deploy these HANA installs in this virtualized environment.
Great, thanks, Brett. And that was part of, and we'll get into this a little bit later as well, but that was definitely part of the goals of the POC that we did with yourself and Dustin, who I'll call on next. But we wanted to demystify it. We wanted to show how simple it was to install HANA on vSphere using our technologies. But I'll let you guys talk about that. So, Dustin, can you share your experiences as well, and why HANA?
Sure. So we started with our SAP implementation about 4 years ago. We actually had a company split, and Marathon Petroleum represents the downstream side of the company, and downstream is an oil business term. We refine and we market products. So 4 years ago, we had a company split. We had to stand up our own SAP environment in our own data centers. We started with SAP on our virtual platform, and it's grown quite a bit since then. Today, SAP actually makes up about 20% of our data center capacity. So over time, as more modules came in, as more business functions were moved from our legacy applications onto SAP, as any system grows and more data gets put into it, performance can become an issue. So for us, BW was the first environment targeted for HANA. It was one that applications, were storing more data and more performance data, so reports were taking much longer to run than the users were used to. So I guess you could say hosting it traditionally, it wasn't meeting our expectations. So that's why we looked to put BW onto HANA.
Great, thanks. Dan, you're up.
Yeah, our story is very similar to his. BW was the first route we took there. Our initial business case was around trade promotion management, so in-store ads, coupons, discounts, those kinds of things. When you look at an organization like Johnsonville or any CPG company, a key driver of growth and one of the largest line items on the P&L is trade promotion. The problem is running that in a traditional monthly load method calculation process was pushing about 40 hours for us. Switching that over to HANA dropped that process down to under 30 minutes, which allows us to get, through finance, they can get more granular cost results, quicker P&Ls, better opportunity to make business decisions. That was really our initial business case for it. After that, in talking with SAP and really where all their development seems to be is on HANA going forward, we've decided to now start moving our entire SAP suite on HANA over. That's pretty much where we're at today.
Great. Len?
So at Secure 24, our story is a little bit different since we aren't necessarily leveraging HANA in our business, since our business is running IT for our customers. Our customers have a myriad of different use cases that they're deploying HANA to solve from a business perspective. But from Secure 24's business, being the fact that we host and manage SAP for other companies, we've always been very much prone to virtualizing everything, and our SAP stack has been more or less primarily virtualized for any deployment we've done over the last 5 years. So it was really a natural progression when SAP started to loosen the requirements around having HANA run on a physical appliance for us to move into that virtual space. Starting off with test dev and then ultimately moving to everything we could from a production workload in HANA. And one of the other areas that we find our customers really like to leverage it is from a POC, people who are putting kind of a business case together for moving in the direction of HANA. If they're hosting their current productive with us, it's simple to move it, do a data migration, give them a sandbox or a POC system for 6 months, let them put the business case together, and then ultimately move the landscape to HANA. So really, it's the flexibility that's key for us, as well as kind of sticking with our standards around virtualization.
Great. Yeah, it's a perfect. The cloud play is perfect for running POCs to demonstrate the business case in a virtualized world. So thanks, Michael.
Sure, hi Bob. So our HANA use case was relatively simple, and it had to do, like most of the folks here, with some sort of performance issue that we were facing. In our case, it was shortly after we went live with SAP back in 2012. And HANA was the answer that SAP was giving us for how we were going to solve for that particular performance issue with some operational reports. So we stood it up as a sidecar in an appliance, and in doing so, we learned a couple valuable lessons. One is around the type of skill sets we had to develop, kind of more on the application side in order to take advantage of HANA. And the other valuable lesson I would say is from, an IT and an infrastructure standpoint. The appliance-based model was something we probably wanted to get away from, and we wanted to go down more of a path of build your own and give us a little more flexibility around, not only building it based on our own existing infrastructure that we had within the data center, but also to start to leverage things like virtualization and cut down our TCO.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So next question, it'll be kind of directed around, why you have chose to virtualize SAP HANA. These are, tremendous business cases, and, we're very pleased that you chose to run such important business cases and HANA on our platform. So thank you for that ahead of time. But, with any kind of mission-critical database or application, whether it be HANA or another database within SAP's HANA platform, there's always concerns around performance, licensing, and support. So I kind of want to ask you guys, what's been your experience around those three issues, performance, support, and then licensing? The question is, and this is more of a myth than it is, your experiences, there really is no additional cost to run HANA on vSphere. We treat it as just another VM. But I would like to hear, from you guys, performance, support, and licensing. How has that been come into play with your deployments? So again, we'll start with Brett.
Yeah, sure. Performance-wise, that's really important for us. That was the whole reason for deploying HANA in the first place, for this in-memory databases to achieve this high level of performance. So when we first went through the POC, of course, the business is a little skeptical with virtualizing such an important high-performance system. So we started in November of last year, and we drove this all the way through the different environments, through dev and tests and UAT, and along the way, it was seamless to the end users. In fact, in some cases, they were saying that the performance had improved. Now, along with that, we also did some other architectural adjustments. So there was a significant performance increase, but the end result, even from the administration staff and all of the users, that there was no noticeability in any degradation. If anything, they were saying it was faster. Regards to support's always kind of tricky with an appliance, right? Because we went through Dell to purchase the appliance. They also, once you go through the purchasing process, there's kind of a transition from the installation to the support, and they want to, in order to get support, it's more of like a managed services type of support if you're doing the appliance, or what we've been looking at doing now is the TDI route. But in any case, SAP supports the VM just as they did the physical install. As long as all the hardware is certified and the installation is certified, there's no support issues at all. And same with licensing. No issues there at all.
Cool. Thanks. Dustin, same question?
Sure. For us, when BW was moved onto HANA and we went live with it May of 2015, when BW was moved onto HANA, we noticed an improvement of about 80 to 90% in our response time for reporting and things like that. So the clients were very happy with the performance. It was quite a bit better than they had before. Reports would run in minutes instead of hours, sort of a thing. So the clients are very happy with it. Honestly, I don't know if the end users know that the database is virtualized, and I don't think they care because they're very happy with the service they get. With regards to licensing, we did not have any additional costs to run it on top of VMware. For support, we've not been denied any support, either from VMware or from SAP, but then again, we've not actually had any issues that required us to involve support with HANA. So we've been lucky, but we have confirmed both with SAP and VMware that we're fully supported. I think we just had to run a little metrics gathering script to make sure that we met all the metrics for HANA since we took the TDI route. But again, we've not had any issues with it.
That's great. Yeah, and I think you and Brett made some really important points here that typically the users don't know or care if it's virtualized. It's completely transparent to them. The performance is super fast, just as you would expect to be as well. And thanks for that. So, Len, we'll go to Dan.
Okay, sure. I would agree. We're the same as what everybody's already been saying. Our users didn't know the difference running SAP non-virtualized to virtualized. They certainly did notice a huge difference when we went from SAP running on SQL Server to SAP running on HANA. That as the others saw, we saw execution gains as high as 90% reduction on jobs. I would say our overall average was not that high. It was probably more around 60 to 70%, but absolutely the users noticed as soon as we switched to running on HANA. Your other questions were what? Licensing. There were no additional licensing costs. There was obviously there are core license costs to VMware, so we did have to purchase some additional cores, but SAP HANA had no additional licensing. And there's not been any support issues in our case. So
that's good to hear. I think part of, I would say, I wouldn't think, but I know part of that is, the close alignment that we've had with SAP over the last couple of years. And and the extensive testing that's gone on, where well over 2.5 years, there's been no functional errors associated with virtualization. So a lot of that has been hashed out, but again, it's great to hear that validated from our customers. And Len, I think your perspective is a little bit different, especially since you're a cloud provider and people are doing POCs. So HANA has to show value and be performant. But I'll let you expand.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. I'd echo what Dan and some of the other guys are saying around the noticeable performance improvements for people who are doing POCs to make the business case for moving off of other database platforms. That certainly is coming into the decision matrix for a lot of the customers, and I've heard from various systems being at BW or Suite that are moving over anywhere from 80 or 90% to 5 or 6x in performance improvements just from moving to that platform. Of course, the virtualization isn't having a significant impact on any of that at all. We do have physical appliances that we run as well. I think when you're talking about running an in-memory compute platform like HANA, that any of the overhead would be negligible. We haven't had any concerns with it. As far as support, same message there from our side across all the customers that we've got engaged. We run on a TDI model, and I know that name's been called out, the Tailored Data Center Integration model, where you can use certified storage and compute to create your own HANA environment for the virtual platform. That's what we run our HANA Cloud on, and SAP's internal group around Tailored Data Center Integration and SAP support has been great in getting that all set up and certified, and there's been no issues that we've encountered for people who've had to put in tickets from that regard. The licensing conversation that I typically have with our customer base or people who are looking at HANA isn't usually around HANA licensing. It's usually around how they can leverage HANA licensing to save off of platforms they have their systems running on today. So there's an advantage where you can use HANA as the platform to move off of other databases and have some licensing saving there, but no additional costs to run it in a virtualized platform from that perspective for sure.
Excellent. Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, our story largely, I think, resembles everything else folks have said. I never even exposed the business to whether or not we're running this physical or virtual. As far as they're concerned, the transition or the migration off of their older database platform to HANA was, a move which brought us to the point where we were smashing any of our SLAs that we had previously established and or were barely able to meet. So it was really an IT decision, and it was made for a multitude of reasons. And there's been no, I think, performance degradation noticed in any case. We did have a slight nuance to the support thing. Keep in mind that we were involved very early with virtualizing HANA. I think we probably beat most of the guys here on the call to the punch, having been live with virtualized HANA back as early as 2013. So at that point, virtualized HANA was still kind of going through the certification process, and SAP and our Max Retention folks had kind of asked us to make sure we have a physical standby available, again, still in TDI, but a physical standby in the event that something kind of popped, if you will, when we went live. And, of course, we never even had to revert to that, and that thing has since then been long provisioned for other use cases. So.
Yeah, for sure. You guys have been live in production longer than anyone, and we worked closely with you on your deployment. And just to be safe, SAP had that physical to virtual or standby physical node in there to be safe, which is prudent, I would say, at that time. But since certification, that's long gone. The reserve the right to make you reproduce on physical does not exist. So thanks for that. And since this isn't a HANA session, I don't want to focus too much on the next question, but essentially, what other VMware products are you using within your SAP landscape to help management? And we'll start off with Brett, and Brett, we'll talk about the SRM component a little bit later, but if you could just, go through line item, which one you want, and then we'll go in detail later in the discussion. So, Brett, what other components are you using?
This is specifically in managing at the SAP environment?
SAP
right.
or, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really it is SRM. That's the only other component that we're using from VMware. Okay,
and we'll get into that actually right after this question, because that's was key to your decision.
Right.
Dustin?
Specific to our SAP environment, we also use Site Recovery Manager for disaster recovery. We use vRealize operations across the board. Of course, we use that for SAP as well if we need to look into performance for an SAP server. We have vCenter Configuration Manager just to make sure that everything is still configured the way we expect it to be according to our templates and our standards. And we're getting into vCenter Orchestrator a little bit more so we can start to script and automate some things.
Okay, great. Dan?
Yeah, pretty much the same as the others. We use vRealize Operations Manager to gain visibility across application storage in the network, all related to SAP. We do all like View and Mirage and all of the things related to the client deployments, but that's not directly related to HANA or SAP. It's just how we deploy to the end user. And we do replication, vSphere replication, SRM, the tool sets and things that everybody's using to, maintain efficient RTOs and RPOs.
Okay, cool. Len?
Yep, very, very similar to the rest of the group. We also deploy from a virtual desktop perspective. We use VMware View in that regard. But yeah, very, very similar product set to the rest of the team.
Okay. And Michael?
Yeah, same here. vRealize Operations. We're using Log Insight actually as well for some of our, to start to kind of enable things like log mining, et cetera. vRealize Automation is something we're working on at the time. It's a little bit more of a roadmap item, and as well as the NSX. We're starting to kind of bring the NSX layer into our portfolio a little bit to help with some of the micro-segmentation from a networking standpoint. Of course, as everybody else mentioned, SRM for replication as well.
Cool. And we will get into SRM since it seems to be a very critical component for not only you guys, but majority of our customers. So we'll get into that a little bit later. The next topic is, we've heard TDI mentioned several times in the discussion so far. So Michael, I'm going to put you on the spot. And can you describe TDI, what it means, and actually what it means to your organization as well?
Yeah, Len kind of hit it earlier. When SAP first introduced HANA, because of, I would say, the intense compute demands, they kind of introduced it initially really as an appliance-only model, meaning they set the rules according to what, combination of compute, storage, and network would be provided in this appliance black box, and then us, as customers would go ahead and consume this, drop it into our data centers, and turn the power on and let it rip. What we found, and I think this is shared by a lot of customers, is that it really didn't allow some of the flexibility that we would want, as well as it was a bit frustrating that when we looked under the hood, what showed up in this appliance, a lot of the components we already had running elsewhere in our data center. In our case, we're big VCE, vBlock consumers, and that combination of, Cisco, EMC backend, of course, and Cisco storage Cisco network was all available within a vBlock. So SAP started to open up the doors a little bit and allow customers to, quote unquote, build their own. And this was a program designed and introduced as tailored data center integration. And effectively what it means is there is a listing, it's on the PAM, if you will, supported by SAP in terms of what compute and storage and you can combine, and then it's on the customer to go through the process of getting things TDI certified. You can go ahead and enroll some SAP consultants for this, or you can set maybe some of your own employees or resources to certain classes that allow them to get TDI certified. at the end of the day, it's just a KPI toolkit that comes with the kernel of HANA. You don't actually even need to fully install HANA itself, because all it's doing is checking the configuration between server and storage and ensuring that you're meeting various KPIs with specific IOPS and throughput. I believe with SPS 9, there's a little more built into that toolkit that's doing some more networking checks if you are, for example, in a scale-out scenario. But bottom line, it is an opportunity for customers to, quote-unquote, build their own, take advantage of maybe some infrastructure they already have in-house, and or allow them flexibility to conform with their own standards. And you know, if you're an IBM customer or whatever, you can go specifically with that hardware and not necessarily be married to a specific back-end storage provider. That would come in an appliance, but you can kind of go with what you already have within your data center.
Great, thanks for that, Michael. And you know, just to add a little bit to that is, you know, TDI model is kind of key to our technology as well, because of the requirements for shared storage around vMotion, DRS, HA, things of that nature. So the TDI model is definitely complementary to vSphere. And since you mentioned the PAM, you know, I do get a lot of questions on, you know, what hardware is certified to run with vSphere. And the simple question is, whatever's on the PAM and whatever's on our HCL is certified. So if you see it there, then you can run it. You can run vSphere, and you can run your HANA environment on that set of hardware.
This is Dustin from Marathon. I'll just add to that a little bit. Even if you don't see a specific type of, you know, server on the list, if you dig into some of the components within the appliance model, you actually might find a specific type of server you're looking for. For us at Marathon, we actually had virtualized an application just before we went into HANA. So we had servers that we knew were large enough to run it. We just had to dig into, they were HP servers, we just had to dig into the HP appliance model to see that the specific type of servers we wanted to use were supported. They just weren't specifically listed on there because they were called the converged system appliance model.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think some of that stems into the fact that there were several locations that you had to go to kind of find out what was certified, what was certified with the appliance and TDI and things of that nature. But SAP's done a really nice job. Now they have a central website where you can kind of punch in the storage provider, the server provider, the size, the use case, E5 versus E7, and it kind of pops out what is certified and not certified. So yeah, I think that early on that was a problem, but you know, excellent point there, Dustin. So for the next set of questions in the remaining time, I'm going to involve the entire panel, and I will be jumping around. And let's start off with Brett from ServiceNow, because we did touch on SRM, or everybody was kind of touching on SRM. So first of all, Brett, could kind of describe your deployment in a little bit more detail, the current size, what your expected growth is for your BPC environment, and then we're going to get into the POC and SRM.
Yeah, sure. So when we virtualized HANA, the size of the database was 128 gigs. Our growth rate is now 25 gigs per month. And so what this does is allow us, by virtualizing it, gives us more flexibility. And by flexibility, I mean our data center is geared towards a virtualized environment. So all of our staff understands how to manage the storage and grow the volumes and grow the size of the systems. And in regards to SRM, that is our DR strategy. For all of the systems in our data center. So the big driving factor for us in virtualizing this was so that we could also include HANA into that DR strategy and not have a one-off kind of strategy for the DR of HANA.
Okay. And on the DR SRM component, there were some compliance factors or compliance initiatives you had to meet. Can you get into those as well?
Yeah, sure. And that again was what really was driving us to come up with a strategy. We had to conform with the SOX compliance by the end of this year, and so we explored different options. But again, all of the other options would have been more difficult for us to manage in this one-off scenario. So yeah, the compliance was definitely driving us. It was our strategy to virtualize, convert from the physical install to the virtual appliance so that we could include it in our SRM DR strategy.
Okay, great. And staying with you, you had mentioned the POC we did together, and you've gone through extensive testing as well as the POC, which I think is the necessary due diligence when you're going to deploy any kind of mission critical system. So, as much as I'd like you to be on vSphere immediately, we started this process a while ago, and as I explained, there's a lot of due diligence here in the POC. Could you go through the POC process, what you did as an organization to feel comfortable that you could run a mission critical database in memory on our platform and not jeopardize the business?
Yeah, so when we first discussed virtualizing HANA, I think it was new. It was last year around maybe July or time frame, and SAP and VMware just announced the support. We tried to engage our vendor for some assistance, but it was so new that they just didn't understand how we were going to do it in the production environment. Everything was sub-production, and they didn't understand how we were going to move from the physical install to the virtual. So I attended VMworld, and I met you, Bob, and we had a discussion, and you said, yeah, let's meet up, walk you through it, and set you on the right path. And that was the greatest thing. That's actually how, without that encounter, without that meeting, we were struggling. And so just what we spent maybe 2 hours over a web conference going through the installation, and it shed a light on how simple it was to build this out. All right, building a template, it really was an easy process, and for that, I really appreciate that your assistance.
No problem. I mean, that's what we that's how we like to engage with our customers. I appreciate the comments as well. But so we'll jump over to Dustin, because Dustin was kind of in a similar situation, and basically, first off, can you do the same thing? Kind of describe your HANA landscape. What percentage of Marathon is virtualized, and database sizes?
Sure. So our SAP environment, we use about 30 different modules in there, spanning 4 different landscapes: sandbox, training, dev, QA, production, and then we have N+1 capacity for production and QA. So with all those different environments, it's easy to grow an SAP landscape pretty large. Our SAP environment is 100% virtual, and it has been from the start 4 years ago, including all of the SQL databases and, of course, SAP HANA. Overall, our data centers are about 98% virtual, and we've got close to 2,000 servers. All of our Oracle and SQL databases are virtualized. We've gone through that process with some of the applications had concerns about that, but we've virtualized all of our database workloads. The only physical workloads we have left that will remain physical are things like domain controllers, our backup infrastructure, and servers that have hardware dependencies like PCI cards that we just can't get away from. So as far as the POC, we were in a very similar situation to Brett. It was about a year ago, a little over a year ago, that we started talking about HANA, and we got a basically a timeline from our CIO that we needed to have HANA running in the data center by the end of 2014. And we knew that we did not know enough about it to meet that goal without help. So we reached out to you, Bob. We had you basically on a WebEx for a day. We had representatives from infrastructure and from SAP and from our various support teams. We set the whole thing up over a course of a day, went through the sandbox configuration, set up a template. You showed us how easy it was to deploy across the various environments, go through the process of uninstalling and reinstalling HANA so that we could do our cloning, things like that. So without that, I don't think we would have met that goal. And then once we met that, our next timeline was to have it running in production by May of 2015. So that was earlier this year, about 6 months ago. And of course, we met that goal as well. We had everything running and passed over to the SAP team in about March, and then that gave our SAP team about 2 months to go through their configuration, understand everything that they needed to do for it, including the database conversion into the columnar format. And we were able to see how much the database was going to shrink once we did that conversion. So we started with our production HANA VM. It was about 400 gigabytes, just under 400 gigabytes in memory. Of course, half that being the database, half that the temporary table space. So in the 6 months since it went into production, we've seen about 15 gigabytes a month worth of growth. There were some one-time growth spurts in there. Not exactly sure why, but today our VM is sitting at about 30 cores and 700 gigabytes of RAM allocated. Great.
Yeah, and on the POC, I think you mentioned something that's very, very important, and which is also key to success, and that was involving the whole team, involving network guys, database guys, SAP people, your OS folks as well, so that everybody has skin in the game. Because the outcome was, it's pretty simple to deploy HANA once you know the best practices and how to virtualize it. But getting everybody in the same room, getting everybody on the same page, was really great when we did this POC with Marathon, because then everybody after the day comes out as a believer. It wasn't like Dustin telling the other team members, "Hey, this was easy." It was the whole team was saying how easy it was, and working with your team was great. I think you have an excellent team, and I appreciate that. The last thing I want to ask you on this topic is, we mentioned best practices, and there were a lot of best practices that were associated with virtualizing SAP HANA, and a lot of those are established best practices from how we do virtualization with other databases. So, one message I do want to get across is that virtualizing HANA is not that different than virtualizing other databases. So, with that said, you had mentioned to me that there were some best practices you were able to leverage across your infrastructure that we went over in HANA. Can you describe some of those, or go over a couple of those?
Sure. We wanted to make sure when we set this up, we were doing it, exactly according to the book. We weren't guessing on anything. So you had a white paper out there that had a lot of the things outlined in it, along with a document from SAP that was pretty much the same perspective, pretty much the same practices from an SAP perspective. So with both of those documents and with your help, we were able to make sure that we did everything by the book. We had a lot of things in place already. Some of the things we did not have, or we had to adjust, were things like low-level technical stuff like disabling unnecessary BIOS settings on the hosts, as well as setting the hosts to high-performance mode instead of power-saving mode in the BIOS. And one other thing that was really interesting that came out of the POC that I was not aware of was the fact that if you have hot add enabled for CPU and hot plug for CPU and hot add for memory, if you have those enabled, it actually disables virtual NUMA, which having virtual NUMA enabled for a workload of this size is critical to get as much performance as you can get out of it. So we had hot plug and hot add enabled across the board just so we could make changes faster, but that's one of the situations where the best practice went against one of the things we were doing, so we had to take a step back and look at that. And we've disabled that, of course, so we can get as much performance as we need out of our HANA servers.
Great, and I think that's also a key point, is that knowing the interaction of our different features is critical when running mission-critical applications or databases, so that there are no surprises, and that's typically what we want to guard against, are any surprises when you do move to production. So thanks, Dustin. I'm going to move on to Johnsonville Sausage now, because fortunately or unfortunately, Dan, you were in a little different situation. You had deployed physical appliances because we hadn't announced with SAP production support. So your story is a little bit different in the fact that once production support was announced, you were going through sort of a migration strategy and kind of abandoning the physical world. So I guess first, can you describe your landscape as Brett and Dustin did, and what percentage of your landscape is virtualized, and then get into, how you're going to move from the physical world to the virtual world.
Absolutely. You're right. We started before, virtualizing was an option, and we started in our BW environment. As we wanted to move to Suite on HANA and other landscapes, we're a 7-landscape environment. It became obvious that that wasn't going to scale using physical appliances. So that's what pushed us to looking at virtualization initially for HANA and pushing to go there. As far as the rest of our environment, it was all SAP SQL Server, and all of that was 100% virtualized for all of the SAP modules we run. Really, going forward, it was because of those multiple landscapes, the ability to cut costs, especially in dev and QA environments when you're running multiple databases under a virtualized scenario. That combined with the RTO and RPO requirements we had and how we were going to handle our DR model pretty much pushed us to looking at the TDI solution for SAP HANA. And we're going the EMC, basically the VCE approach, looking at a large V block, positioning HANA on that, along with the rest of our SAP environment, which would be transitioning from a different virtualized environment.
Okay, great. And you touched on, the operational TCO or capital TCO. Without giving us figures, can you kind of estimate or percentage, or if you can give us figures, even better, on what savings have you experienced around, or you expect to experience from migrating from a physical?
Sure. I mean, I think I get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I can give examples, right, of you're going to run a dev QA production environment. You're going to run multiple landscapes, and in those, especially in development, some of those databases are very small. But in a physical hardware environment, you're tied to blades per environment, and when you virtualize, that's no longer the case. Now you become tied to the memory associated with that physical piece of hardware. So that would allow you to run multiple databases on that same piece of hardware. There are even scenarios too where I know you have to, from a TDI environment, you have to use stuff that's certified for support. But when you start looking at things like dev and QA, in those scenarios, you don't necessarily even need to run the certified hardware. You can save some costs by running hardware that's not, and still virtualize it and still get the gains.
Yeah. And I think on the same, on a similar thread here, is, and I think we've talked about this offline before, is that the multi-tenancy versus consolidation and isolation of VMware, and what, how multi-tenancy, classic multi-tenancy, kind of differs from virtualization and what that brings. So can you get into that a little bit?
Absolutely. So first of all, in a multi-tenancy scenario, we don't, for production, they're not even letting us really do that. I'm thinking multi-SID in our production appliance. So while when you're virtualizing, obviously you have the virtual isolation, so you can run as many copies as you're capable of.
I think that's a great point, is that you can't, the isolation that we provide, guaranteeing resources to a particular HANA virtual machine, can't be guaranteed in a multi-SID environment because it's more shared, whereas we provide that full isolation. You can have multiple OSs in the same box. You could be running multiple versions, different versions, so you're not tied to a lot of the constraints around multi-tenancies. And I'm not speaking specifically around HANA, but in general, these are the basics of why you would want to virtualize, or the benefits of virtualization. So I think with that, we can jump over to Len, and again, much different perspective since you manage cloud providers. So can you describe your offerings, what's certified in your cloud, what you can run, and things of that nature?
Yeah, certainly. So again, a little bit of a different perspective. We do, we have been running HANA for the last 2 or more years, starting in the physical and then going to the virtual about a year ago. From a productive support perspective, we manage a very large server environment, probably 5,000, 6,000, maybe 7,000 now. I'm not sure what the current count is, of servers across all myriad of applications. High percentage of that is virtualized today, so my guess would be around 90-95% is virtualized. The same trends are going in the HANA space, right? As we've discussed before, we probably have about 50 or 60 HANA instances that are running today. We can virtualize on the suite side up to a terabyte, BW up to 512. I think that fits really well into what most people need. When you're looking at an existing system, you're getting a good compression ratio. You could see 1/4 of the size. You could be 4x compression. So we're seeing that the virtualized sizes can fit most systems that people are running today. And then certainly from a net new perspective, it allows for ease of scalability is one of the big selling features. So you start off with maybe a 256 or 512 gig instance, and as your system grows, you can scale that up without having to make the investment up front of what your end target will be over maybe a 3-year period. So our customer base are able to leverage that from a virtualization perspective. We can virtualize and run anything that's HANA supported, which is pretty much the entire stack these days. SAP's worked very quickly in the last couple of years to move pretty much any product to the HANA stack with very few exceptions. So if you've got a number of different products from SAP, just like you can run on SQL or Oracle today, most of those are going to be certified to run on HANA, and therefore we could run them there. If they're not, obviously we would still stay with the same model. We would virtualize and just run a different database if there was one-offs that weren't certified. So from a product offering perspective, Bob, I mean, it pretty much runs the gamut. From a usability, I think it's the vast majority of instances out there, unless you're extraordinarily large or need a scale-out environment for, say, BW, we can virtualize those workloads.
Yeah, great. And I think you are both certified for scale up and scale out in your cloud environment, and as is vSphere. Can you describe some of the guidance you give your customers as to which model suits them, or is it completely dependent on the use case?
A lot of it's really dependent on the use case. I mean, one of the advantages that I think that we bring to the customer experience is that we've got that experience across the board, and we can add value to that conversation. So it is kind of a case-by-case scenario. In generalizing it, though, certainly there's only certain products that are available to scale out in the BW and warehouse space, the EDW space. So scaling out certainly limits your conversation to a subset of products. Scaling up is going to be the mainstay for most of the SAP products that are going to be on the NetWeaver stack. The other conversation that we tend to have around the sizing of an environment is around, data maintenance. People are looking at moving existing systems into HANA, and when you do your sizing, you can identify sometimes areas where the data maybe hasn't been cleaned up, and that can have a significant impact on the overall sizing, as well as leveraging something that just hasn't come up in this conversation so far around dynamic tiering and the ability to push some of the colder BW data out of that memory space and really just focus on the value-added memory being or data being in memory. So usually the conversation is in those three areas of what products can you scale out versus scale up, what cleanup can be done to maximize your investment, as well as how do you do data maintenance going forward to make sure that you can kind of keep some constraints around the size of the system as it grows.
Yeah, I think that's a great point around data maintenance and data placement and knowing what your data actually what your data is actually comprised of, because we get the question around recently vSphere 6.0 has been certified for test dev environments, and a lot of our customers are waiting for that because they believe that they can't virtualize HANA databases because they're over a terabyte. Well, that's just not the case now with dynamic tiering and, as you mentioned, data maintenance around nearline storage, to be able to shrink that in-memory component. And certainly that drives cloud economics, because if you can run in a smaller in-memory footprint and still give the customer the performance that they require, there's cost savings associated with those type of deployments. So thanks for that. And we can expand on that, I think, with Michael as well, because first we'll get into his landscape, and I know we're running up against the clock here, but Michael has taken advantage of nearline storage. And Michael, if you can kind of describe your initial sizing and how nearline storage has come into the equation around the same data maintenance that Len has described, and how that shrunk the overall size of your HANA deployment.
Right. So we've been pretty active with multiple SAP products. As Len mentioned, some of the different SAP products maybe have different demands as it relates to the underlying HANA platform. But SAP BPC, we have the sidecar, SAP BW, their new planning app called IBP, Integrated Business Planning, and we're getting we're getting closer to a go live with CRM on HANA, which goes live in January, so less than a month and a half from now. I'm mumbling because I'm barely sleeping as a result of this go live. Just kidding. As it relates to BW, though, specifically, we had recognized early on that perhaps we had a little bit of a growth problem. Again, we're still a relatively new SAP customer, and our BW system was growing, exponentially. So we wanted to make sure we had a solution that would get kind of curb that growth problem, and that some of it was habits, but the other piece of the puzzle was a technical process that we put in place, or a technical solution rather, and that was nearline storage within BW, leveraging effectively Sybase IQ as a disparate data mart, columnar-based, to dump the nearline storage data to. And effectively what this helped us, I would say, significantly. For starters, it was a relatively turnkey project, which was a bit of a surprise, because typically when SAP buys some of these newer, these other products, Sybase or otherwise, it takes maybe a few versions for that product to be fully integrated. But this was relatively turnkey for us. It took us roughly 6 months to actually get live, and then only another 3 or 4 months to start to see the benefits of it, and by shrinking kind of the database. So starting to run through the database, the primary hot BW database, and upload data through Nealine storage. The process is very much driven by the application tier itself. You have to define kind of new queues with an in provider on top of that and dump the data into those new queues, which then get uploaded into IQ. Net for us was roughly a 50% database size savings. So that meant when it came time for us to migrating to HANA, keep in mind we did this before we migrated our BW instance to HANA. When it came time to migrating it to HANA, we not only had to accommodate, a smaller data footprint as part of our migration and sizing exercise, but we're able to kind of stay ahead of the growth patterns now as we kind of expand out from here.
That's great, and I think the feedback around the SAP IQ product is that it is a mature product, and I think that's one of why it was so turnkey for you guys. And I think we're running up, Steve. I think we're running up against I think we've gone over. So
yes, unfortunately, great conversation, folks. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. So we've gathered up the audience questions, and we will follow up with you over the next few business days. We also pushed out a survey that we hope that you can provide some feedback for us. We greatly appreciate that. And we want to thank you all for attending today's webinar, How SAP Customers Are Accelerating SAP HANA Adoption at Lower Costs with VMware, hosted by SAP Insider and presented by VMware. Shortly after this live event, we'll send you an email reminder so you can access this presentation on demand. On behalf of Bob Goldsand of VMware and his customer expert speakers, we want to thank you for your time and have a great day.